Everyone. Hi, I'm Christina Todd, and I have the absolute joy of introducing a great colleague and a friend from long ago, Dr. Brian Shmaefsky. Brian and I went through the academy together, along with Dr. Clark, also in the room, and it was great fun getting to know these wonderful people. And I have had the joy of seeing presentations and watching Dr. Shmaefsky engage these students for decades here at Lone Star College, and he is the ideal person to come and talk with everybody about creating innovation and new ideas for student engagement. You can see from the picture that he has on his opening slide that he comes up with different things to get people's attention going. Everyone, welcome Dr. Brian Shmaefsky.
I knew the toilet would engage you. And that's actually one of my engagement projects with my students. I mean, don't try to fit it into your teaching. It goes actually with mine, so whatever. But what we're going to talk about today is I always talk in plural, and I apologize for that. But what we're talking about today is, I hope not to talk too much, but let you guys have time to let things absorb in your head. So I know for me, I have a quandary or a problem just starting this session. Because first of all, I'm talking about engagement, which means I got to keep all of you awake, I guess. But also, I'm assuming you attended here for a reason related to the talk. So how many of you are here because you using this just to keep from falling asleep? How many of you are here because you want to hear about student engagement? You raise your hand before you finish? Wow. Oh my gosh, is it evident to my forehead? How many of you are here because you're just taking it for the credit? I mean, we have to meet those 30 hours. What is it? So whatever. And how many of you are here because you read about me in the news? You say, man, I got to see this guy. So basically, okay, really? Oh, okay. Yeah, don't tell me what type of story. But seriously, so I have an engaged audience already, I'm hoping. When we start walking into the classroom, I then think about this term called disengagement. And my students are not necessarily there for me unless it's because they hear I'm entertainment value and that's all they expect out of me. I'm hoping they're there to learn about my discipline, environmental science, because I find it interesting, but many of them don't because they're taking it because biology, chemistry, physics, and astronomy require a lot of science. They don't realize that in my class that I take it, but so I have this audience of people that don't fit a perfect bell curve of interest. I'm usually looking at a skewed audience, which unfortunately probably most of it is going to be students that are going to be difficult to engage in the content. And I'm going to look at actually the science of engagement because I was a practicing scientist, okay? And I came out of industry, believe it or not, where we had very specific learning outcomes when I was training people in a production facility, and they were there with high motivation, especially because of their advanced degrees and whatever, and they're in a job they wanted. But when I got into the classroom, it was a totally different story. And so, again, I'm trying to think of strategies of making things relevant. And that's going to be the take-home message today. And I am not vacuuming that up. So also, when I think about the term engagement, and again, this is going to be, I'm going to talk about from a research study what I was doing. I have to define terms. I come from a family that we spoke 4 languages, and English was done because of necessity. So when I use a term, I want to use it correctly, particularly English. And Dr. Clark knows I get in trouble sometimes with some terms, and I'd rather not hear right now. So, I'm going to define engagement from the perspective of what we're going to use it for in this talk. Does that make sense? And then how do we apply it? So, but this is a study I've been working on for 3 years on about 12 sections of students on trying to find out, what does it mean to engage a student? And then what are the strategies that we have out there now, which we call EBIPs? What is it? Evidence-based, type of projects or about, or strategies. And then which ones I'm going to select that are relevant to my teaching. So this went through basically just a year of preparing and looking at different evidence-based practices that we know technically in the educational literature do supposedly, lead to engagement by the definition we're going to look at in a minute. What I did separate out was who was doing these research studies and what were these tips being used for. And a lot of what I got from the literature was about 90% of the evidence-based practices that supposedly engage students were done at major universities, private universities, and done with students that were highly motivated, very much like what I dealt with in industry, with very highly motivated learners. So when I look at my students, and I'm not putting them down because I was a community college student, didn't get a full high school diploma. My English was deplorable, still is, but I just sound more literate now. And still mispronounce things too, but seriously, so I think of me as a student, look at mine and say, how do I, what's their motivation to be here? Can I give them motivation to be here? And what's their life all about that when they're sitting in this classroom, are they going to be concentrating on me? Because a lot of my students have jobs. I have a lot of veteran students that are dealing with their own demons. I mean, I have a veteran son, veteran brother. I wasn't a veteran because I got kicked out, but whatever. But I can understand that what they're going through. So I got to think about all these things as I apply a practice. Is it going to be effective in my audience? And I also have to think about, the level of English involved, the level of math involved in looking at my SLOs, because that's what I live for. That's what paying my bills is, making sure I'm addressing those SLOs. So I did this is a very thorough analysis. And I'm going to tell you also what students say about evidence-based practices once we're done with the talk, and look at the limitations of this. So what the heck is student engagement? Because when I first got this fellowship to learn about it, I kept thinking of, am I going to be officiating marriages at a college? Wow, that's cool. Okay, I'm not ordained for that. So whatever. But when I look at interest and try to distill it to the point where I can look at measurables, okay, because I don't like doing abstract measurements, aesthetic based measurements, whatever. So what basically it is the student participating in that activity? And are they participating in their own learning? And this to me is measurable because I can tell it by the quality assignments I get back. When we talk about assessment and things like that, I can tell them if they did the assignment or chat did. Now we have that complication. And other things. So I have something where I can at least come up with a Likert scale of engagement. I mean, it's difficult to add a number to that. So part of what I did was assess different types of engagement strategies, which worked for our students. And believe me, that changes from class to class. When I have a group of high school students in my classes, wow, that's a totally different challenge. When I have a student that's very heavy in English is, and I call it alternative language because that's how I use languages. That's an issue too, because again, I have to be careful of things that discourage engagement, things that confuse the students, things that offend the student. I also look at inclusiveness because I know in my career growth, my type were not encouraged to go to college. We were not encouraged to take technical jobs. I mean, and stuff. And I did it for a while. I worked, whatever, labor and did whatever until I realized, man, I have a brain up there. It's not just warming the rest of my body. So seriously, so I take this into consideration. And I'm not saying everybody has to do it to that level of detail, but these are something to consider, every semester when I look at my classes. And just last night at our adjunct in service, I went through this with my adjuncts. And some of them were like, oh my gosh, this guy's full of hot air. Others are like, that's a lot of work. But also, if they want to be successful at their own job and be fulfilled and not saying, my gosh, I just lectured to a bunch of zombies, these are strategies to alleviate that. So even for our own mindfulness, it's important to ensure that students are engaged and we're not talking to the dead, basically. So what I'd like to ask you, and what you can do is you can ask yourself by just saying self, or you can look at the person next to you if they look smarter than you and say, hey, what do you do with this? Or your own strategies. And I'd like you to just think about, first of all, now that we know what engagement means, I mean, students taking part actively in their learning with interest and whatever, they're participating. What are some techniques that you commonly use to actively engage students during class? And you can just shout it out, I don't care. If you have a really good strategy, you know it works.
Discussions.
And how do you know discussions work?
Good question.
Okay, yeah, because I did that on purpose because I have to question that myself sometimes. Go ahead.
Follow up on that, one of the best teaching pieces of advice that I ever got was when you ask a question, you actually wait for an answer. So that the students come to expect that the silence is fine, you're still waiting for an answer, instead of, oh, we wait long enough for the other.
Yeah, and that's kind of fun. I like that discomfort level after a while when somebody finally raises their hand and say, the heck with it. And then hopefully it what do you call it? Snowballs, whatever. So, yeah. So do any of you assign projects as engagement? Group work.
Hands-on activities.
Yeah, whereas other students now, we're working with each other, they're saying, this guy got engaged, we're gonna kick him out of the room. Yeah, because students, I like students, they're enforcers of other students' behavior, and I kind of like that, so I use that a lot. And we look at some of the different strategies. And here's a kind of interesting one too, that I learned in going through this fellowship program was, how often do you adjust your teaching on the fly or on the spot? And what type of feedback do you get? What we call on-the-spot feedback to evaluate participation levels as you're lecturing or throughout the semester. Do any of you do that?
You know, I'd ask a question and I'll wait for an answer, but nobody had an answer, I'm just gonna pick somebody out. But then based upon their answer, I can determine if the class really understands it. So then basically what I have to do is come back and really, explain it physiologically in a different way, and then come back with another question. And then finally I can kind of assess if they got it.
Yeah, and sometimes that's difficult to do. So no, we're in a discipline where you have to fly through the material. We have a lot of content. And sometimes, but you can't move along without it. So it's a darned if you do, darned if you don't situation. And you go ahead.
Well, I'm in nursing and I will ask a question and then they'll take it off on this tangent. And so I do have to often go back and revise maybe the way I ask the question or participation. So I might have to say, okay, let's move on to the next topic or whatever. Keep it moving because the students will get very overwhelmed with too much discussion where a person has taken it off the top.
Yes.
I thought, because I teach a hybrid course, that I would be able to do more practice and then maybe do online lectures that we spend the time in class. I teach language. We can spend that time practicing. And I realized no one was doing their homework. And I mean, no one was doing their homework. They weren't even accessing the textbook. So on the fly, I realized we got to go do some lectures in class, so they're not going to learn it at all. I mean, they came to all the classes, they were ready to participate, but they were going to do zero outside of class. So that all of a sudden became, now I got to do the lecture and anything that they were going to practice in homework. Now we have to incorporate that in class. This was just past fall semester. Same class in the afternoon. And these are students who came to class, have done their homework, prepared, ready to go. So different from the class I taught just a few hours earlier.
Yeah.
So it was,
And here's a big difference between, time of day engagement and also online versus face-to-face engagement. I know, yes.
I used to help support assessment, learning outcomes, et cetera. And I always tell faculty, listen, you do more assessment in one lesson plan than most administrators do in a year. You're constantly looking for that feedback. Heads nodding as opposed to looking off in the distance. That's something you're doing. When I used to teach, my course evaluations were always higher later on in the day, even for the same course, because I made adjustments from the morning to the afternoon in what I'm teaching. So faculty are doing assessment all the time. So now if you can just make it more formal, et cetera, you're on that curve though. So, you shouldn't be afraid of it. You're doing it. And
you raised a good point, which I hate. I'm the kind of reads the end of the book first and wants to look at the end of the movie before I watch the movie. So I'm going to give you some of the end points, but of the student survey is that students, the biggest thing they want is to be heard. And they want you to be aware of where they're learning, whether they're learning or not at that particular time. But that's kind of interesting because they do want to have some input in it. And they do want to know that you're concerned about them learning and not just talking to a wall. So very good. And then I'll talk about it because the students had some really interesting comments. Now we're going to look at also challenges. So do you ever think your biggest challenge about engagement? What's the worst challenge you have about engagement?
Getting 100% participation.
Wow, yeah, good luck on that. That's a limitation. I gave away another thing. Okay.
So, we know, since a lot with all the APs, nursing and this thing, it's challenging is to be sure that they get the concepts and everything in order to successfully matriculate into the healthcare program.
And you communicate that to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's another engaging point, is that's you're putting the carrot out
Yeah.
for them, and that's important. I mean, sometimes there has to be forced engagement. Like in industry, you're gonna blow up the plant if you don't learn this, do this properly, and things like that. So good. So I just wanted to engage you and get you thinking, and I could spend all day letting you talk, because that would actually save me some voice and whatever, but I do have some content to give you. So, when I'm trying to justify, why am I doing this? Okay, besides I want to keep my job, why should I care about these things? And a lot of it is, I am truly interested in my students getting the academic skills they'll need to get through life. And that's what, as I went to a 2-year tech school actually, and they showed me that concern because they were placing me. I was going into actually X-ray, we called it X-ray tech back then. Now it's called imaging, I think, because we didn't have a lot of the imaging back then. But they showed an interest and they were targeting our learning, and we were aware of that. And I know they were interested in us developing those skills. They didn't want us killing anybody or, us killing someone and say, oh, you went to school there. So whatever, but still, but I had a sense of I was learning skills I needed to know, like Dr. Clark was saying, and these are going to be important. It enhances retention, we're finding out. And this is what my study was really about, is we have some SLOs that we are not doing well on. And I want to know why. And the biggest problem was not due to students not knowing the work, they were just not doing it, or they were just plagiarizing it totally because they didn't want to put the effort into that particular SOL we were measuring. And that's kind of frightening. So it's not that I had to adjust my teaching, I had to figure out how do I get the students engaged in that particular type of assignment. And it was an assignment that involved statistics. Even though it was an online software to just plug in, they just found it not intuitive. And most of what we found out was the SOLs we were suffering on were in math, related to math, related to calculation, and unfortunately too, critical and sometimes ethical thinking. And in environmental science, we have to measure ethical thinking, changes in ethical thinking over time. And students a lot of times avoid that. It's uncomfortable and it's very difficult sometimes to get conversations in classes without having a fist fight. So, so when we look at some of these SOLs, some of them to be a little, easier to work with, some not. And again, this is all black type stuff, that we all really know about that. We know this is for the betterment of the student and it's for lifelong skills and whatever. So I'm just repeating probably what everybody knows. Now, when we look at the levels of engagement, and this is something now that in my class, this becomes very important because we have different levels of learning content. And I think this is probably true for every discipline. But when we look at the level of engagement, I look at course level, course design. So I go through with my adjuncts, we go through what is a course design that encourages students, even if it's kicking or screaming, to do things where they're actively learning. And we're going to talk about a balance of actively learning, because sometimes you do too much active learning and it's a discouragement and it's a hurdle. Even for me, I get burned out. by it sometimes. And I know like physicians and stuff, that's, and even any health professional, you're going in that level of thinking, and it's hard to do. And here we're expecting students to do it, sometimes in a class that they're not interested in, or, you know, just barely getting through. So there's course design. And I don't want to go into this in detail, but these are things that I'm sure we have the expertise in our system that we could get help with. And I know people that can help with that too. Classroom environment. One thing I learned from students is that for them to be engaged, they have to feel included. And I know that again from my own college experience, being the only person of my type in a class, in a university classroom, once I did go to college. And the better the university I went to, the more I felt excluded. I mean, socioeconomically, ethnically, whatever. So this is very important to me, that the students feel comfortable. And I don't care what the inclusiveness is. Is it disability? Is it whatever? Is it language barrier? Is it, you know, I mean, there's different types of way of feeling included. And this is kind of funny too. We talk about group work. I do not like group work. I was never very fluent in communication. I'm probably not now, but whatever. And I did not like discussing with people things, because I learned to see pictures in my head and not words. Because when I think of a word, my current kids learn this very quickly. They get me so mad that I wouldn't know what language to pick for the word I'm about to swear them in. So I'd stagnate, and kids go, "Oh, look at that, you can't think." Okay, so I want an environment where I'm presenting things in a way, or interacting things in a way that's comfortable as a student. And some students want to be passive in a group. I'm not gonna, one barrier is pushing students in a way out of their inclusiveness zones. Now, if they're going to a job in public speaking, damn, they better, you know, that's something they have to learn to avoid a career. And then there's the whole concept of belongingness too, with does the student, this is kind of overlaps with inclusiveness, but do they feel they fit with the way you're teaching, with the content you're presenting? And I know I mean, darn, I went to school with Julius Caesar, so what's relevant to me is not relevant to my students. And I have to sit down and think about, when I'm giving examples, giving activities, that the students understand the context of it. And I try to avoid jargon and phrases sometimes, so that, again, they're not feeling left out. Like I'm talking to an audience of 50-year-olds or 60-year-olds or stuff like that. I'm serious. These are all little things that students talk about. And I think that's kind of cool that they're free to say that. And that's part of belongingness too, is that the students feel that they belong with you. Because I've had adjuncts and I've had faculty at other places that were totally intimidating and to the students. None of the students ever felt they belonged. In fact, half my colleagues didn't feel they belonged to that person. So this is a very important thing too, that again, this is, some people have that personality trait, others don't. It's something to work on. Levels of feedback and reflection with students is you can work on this too. We talked about that. It's getting continuous feedback, on the spot feedback, and students feel that you show an interest, and even getting students to reflect on their learning. I do quick reflective moments all the time, despite all the content I have to cover. And again, if they can't reflect on that concept, how can I move forward in my content? And then engagement beyond the classroom. What do we call that? Homework? I like this term better. I'm giving some engagement beyond the classroom, but I want students to apply their knowledge at home. So I have projects that they work on with either educating the community, educating their family, or or doing something that's involving their learning. And I pick a couple of my favorite SLOs, and we do a lot of application. Now, that was the toilet picture you showed there. That was a art project my students did. We actually did a gallery exhibit on it, on what's your impact on water quality in the area. And that was a big interest to students, because a lot of students thought that their water sucked, which it did. And there were and I had them reflect on, okay, where does your water pollution come from that affects your drinking water? And that was the toilet exhibit. And whatever goes in the toilet makes a circle back to the other side of the digestive system. So whatever. And boy, when we had the public come in, that was kind of an eye opener. So that's engagement. they are using content, and that was really kind of cool, but you can't do that in all classes. I mean, I'm trying to work on that, but whatever. So when we look at engagement, we're looking more at less of a passive model of learning, more of an active model of learning, but again, with some control. And I'll talk about some of the data on that. And then when we look at types of engagement too, I have to worry about behavioral engagement. Are the students, actively participating and showing that they're not enjoying, but feeling comfortable doing an activity? Are they really doing their own thinking? Emotional engagement. I want students to feel good, or I shouldn't say feel good, to have an emotion about the content of my class, because emotional learning sticks with you. I mean, even as a kid, first time you cried over something, remember that the rest of your life. Okay, and I want students to have emotional learning as part of how they use the context of the work. Today in politics, they see a lot of emotional arguments, and I want them to understand, to learn at that level and learn how to temper that and work with facts and understand emotions too. And then the cognitive engagement, the degree of effort about thinking, and I'm thinking at the factual level. In environmental science, students think we don't do facts. They think we look at rabbits and bunnies and we, kiss trees. And they don't think there's technical stuff to learn. So these are all important things. If you're going to do engagement, you got to pick and choose. It's difficult sometimes to get all three of these involved together, but this is where you look at your learning outcome and say, hey, I'm interested from this perspective for this one, because I really don't have to measure it that much, or I can find a measurement for that, or this one. And a couple of our PLOs actually involved changes in behavior of a student after learning content, which is kind of cool, or objective decision-making versus emotional decision-making. So this is really kind of cool when we look at this. Now, to go into other aspects of engagement, what are the barriers? And this is something you probably experience yourself. But this is something that actually I started doing as part of my measures. And I worked with a team of people. There was 20 faculty from all over, all of us community college faculty testing our students and comparing it to the current literature. So one of the biggest factors is, of course, motivation deficit. And this is the hard one where you can't get 100% of your class. I mean, you're going to have a student that just had a tragedy. You're going to get a student like I have some that came right off of work, 8-hour days, or their kids are sick and whatever. And you know what? At that point, I don't know how to motivate. The best thing I can do is to motivate later when they're in the time frame and give them an alternate assignment or post it on D2L and let them finish and learn on their time. And that's the biggest thing I do in my classes. Everything that goes on face-to-face is on that D2L site. And if the student wasn't motivated to be there mentally or even physically, they at least get the content. And that is one of the greatest things I say about the courses, is that they have the time to make that up when they're not in a learning mood. And again, this goes along with mental health challenges. I deal with this with a heck of a lot of students where I feel like I need to get a PhD in psychology or something, because these are issues I feel uncomfortable with, but also it's, again, the student's not going to be in an engaging moment. So you have to think about alternatives and think about how am I going to present this material later to that student when they're more of an engaged mode. Learning styles is an issue that it could be a non-issue. I'm not going to go into a debate about that, but presenting ways in multiple ways of learning is also engaging students, because if you're just lecturing like I'm doing right now, it's going to be totally torturous to some students that need to be shown how to do something physically or visually. And I love this one, cognitive load. This is why I don't teach his classes, because the minute you open your mouth, the students reach cognitive load. And man, it is brutal. I'm sure a lot of you run into that in your teaching. And this is where we just have to take a step back and think about alternative ways of presenting and not a wall of words. And maybe I bring Legos to class to sometimes talk about the structure of nature and biological molecules. And we go into things like toxicology. So I use Legos as a way to show how toxins work in the body. I actually did that once for a jury in Oklahoma. I was asked to show jurors how a toxin works. And that's when I thought of the Legos, because they can relate to it. If I just stood there like an idiot and pontificated, they were like, oh, what's this guy saying? So whatever. So, I mean, I find, different ways of presenting this without it being an overwhelming wall of words. I'm serious. And then prior knowledge. In my classes, there's no English and math requirement. So we have to deal with that. And I tell my faculty, you're going to have to find a way to deal with that. When you start asking them to do statistics, ask to do, mathematical formulas, because we have formulas in environmental science that I can't even do. I just plug it into a, computer and whatever, because I can't do that level of math. I'm serious. So this is something we got to think about as we're going along with the SOLs. Is it something about something else related to the SOL that is affecting you teaching that concept? I know Dr. Clark, because I've taught those classes, runs into that with like lung function, respiratory system function, gas pressures. And when you said gas pressures, thinking of people about, yeah, I ate beans last night, I got gas pressure, all right, and whatever, and partial pressures. It's like, oh yeah, I'm partially, whatever. So seriously, and that takes away from the whole learning of that experience. So these are things we have to dissect out when we're teaching, saying, what's the real problem I'm having with this being an engagement barrier? Is this making sense? I hope, and whatever. And I can send you the PowerPoint, whatever. And then there's educator-related factors. This is something I'm well aware of in my own personality. So when we look at teaching methods, I'm not the motivational speaker type. I also am not the type of person that gets invited to formal sessions because I don't know why, but whatever. Maybe because they can't get me in a suit. So whatever, but seriously, so I have a style of teaching that's comfortable for me, but I have to also ensure that it's going to be comfortable for the students, but not 100%, of course. And again, what are we looking at, 70% of the class being successful? So I keep that statistical thing in my head that I have to worry about too, is I'm working with a skewed population of how a lot of these teaching methods were tested. So we're looking at a population that we might have to work a little harder. Good, thank you. So I'm right on target, right? Wow, okay. Limited feedback. So when you're not allowing students to provide you with feedback, I'm not allowing to hear their voices. Because I ask students, what do you think of that assignment? And sometimes I'll get the polite, it's okay. And if it's totally dead, then I know I bombed. So it's getting student feedback as much as even when I give an assignment, I ask them, what interests you? Because I never had that in my university education. No one ever asked me what was, even when I was doing my PhD work, they never asked me if I was interested in what I was researching or not. They just wanted to get the stuff done and to fulfill the grant. So this is kind of a neat little thing here about getting feedback. Because when I did tell my advisor what I really wanted out of it, he goes, well, you're gonna have to find someone else to network with, to hook up with. And I did. Change advisors, kind of put me back a little, but whatever. So, they can't change professors on you, but whatever. And then one of the barriers too is bias and inclusivity. And this is something I was very sensitive to about the classes I took, because I didn't understand all the English words that they were using. I'm serious. And I noticed that out of my students too. I'm really toning down the 4-syllable words that I'm using in class and being careful of the jargon. I know some of our fields require jargon, but there's a way to present it in common language or given, some type of a analogy, metaphor, whatever for it. And then the content, of course, is going to be an issue as a barrier to engagement. So it's a lack of inactivity, complexity of the concept, and relevance. And this is what I try to focus on the most in environmental science, is how do I make the science relevant to everyday life? I know if I had to teach math, I wouldn't know how to do that. Statistics, yeah. Physics, maybe. Chemistry, oh gosh, you have to push hard on that. So it all depends on your discipline, but guys, if that's your discipline, hopefully, we can find creative ways of applying it. And I apply my work background, my industry background for students, because that's something they can relate to and talk about and things like that when it comes to a barrier to engagement. So when we look at engagement, most of what we talk about with engagement is thinking about all these different active learning ways. And these are all active learning ways we find in the literature that is mostly evaluated by, university people working with the ideal college student, compared to the students that we have that have a lot of issues and are sometimes hesitant to be in college like I was, because we were afraid. We didn't know what to expect. Our parents never prepared us for it. So when we look at some of these, we have to use these with caution and test them out. So I use a lot of, I don't use jigsawing. I like think, pair, share. I should have done that in here. If I had more time. I love case studies because this is what my science is all about. It's case studies. So, and students love them because they go, man, it's really, if it's an engaging one, they really like it. And if it's one related to them, they really like it. That's what was wonderful about COVID. That became a great case study for environmental scientists to look at our relationship with animals and how that leads to human diseases and pandemics. My students were not very good with polling, discussion forums, sometimes gamification. We've tried it. And I think I got gamification wrong. I was exposing them to radiation. I guess that's not the right thing. Okay, and whatever. But and then the students sometimes enjoy group projects. And my students do, I'm finding out, like peer reviews, because they can really get back at the little jerk that was not doing their work in class. So whatever, seriously, but they're really more honest with themselves. And it's funny because they will listen to each other on a criticism before they listen to me. So if I critique them on something, they're like, okay, but then if a student critiques them the same way, they accept it. So as far as learning and what they learn. So this is, these are strategies, but again, we got to think about what works for us. And also what we got to think about is that students on learning say that they want passive learning out of a professor. They want to be engaged with lecture. They want the ability to take notes on the fly. Not all of them, but I mean a bulk. And this is consistent through all the community colleges that we sample. It's funny, university students were the opposite. They wanted active learning, because they were already prepared for it and have the wherewithal, whereas a lot of our students don't. So this is something to think about too. So what I'd like to do is kind of end at this point and just get some feedback on this and how you will digest this. I used a big word. Okay, so whatever. So when the audience is quiet, either you got nothing out of it or you're stuck.
For engaging, like lecture, I was a former K-12 teacher, so I know we use things like Nearpod or ClearDeck. We could like embed questions. Like if you have, like I teach history, so there's like a short little speech or excerpt the students can like highlight. But I know some of the feedback I've gotten in the past from students is that like if they don't have technology, when they do, like they're using the battery doing that activity with me in our 80-minute class. There's only like so many plugs and they have to go to their next one, then it's gonna be dead, so they can't take notes. So I know for myself, just trying to limit how much we do, maybe just shorten it. But that's something that I've tried to make it more engaging. Or I'll just print things out on paper. They actually do like doing things on paper as well.
But you got that feedback from them.
Yes, that's what they told me.
Yes.
Surprised. So like technology, you love being on your phones, but like no.
If I had a prize, I'd give it to you. No, but that's an excellent strategy. Seriously. That's that on that spot feedback type of thing where, you're not going to get 100%, but at least you're getting feedback from the majority. And maybe those that don't give you feedback, they're just fine.
But develop our own private website with all the and about 300 YouTube videos and everything. So even if they don't get it in class, they can go back and they have all our PowerPoints, YouTube videos, and then I'll pick a student or 2 or 3 students that are stellar in the class in A&P. I'm a physician by trade, so I'll pick 2 or 3 students that are stellar in class. And that next semester, I'll hire one out of my own pocket. to I know students like, I've done that year to year. You're not holding back 2 semesters. Far more than the college.
Right.
And then they do well. And out of 10, I probably hired about 7 that gone to med school because they already got their degree and work with me. They already got it. So they. So I try to do a lot to keep them engaged in the class, and out of the class, to think go home.
And yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, well, when it comes to engagement, and by the way, I teach history and humanities. I think in most of our classes, there's one student that is super engaged, super passionate, but who can easily monopolize the class. And so those are some students that I try to work with, hey, hey, I love your passion. And let's actually, from the beginning, start like a conversation on the side. Start a conversation on the side with them. It's like, okay, so what are you interested in? Civil War. Well, let's actually start with some documents. Why don't you watch these videos, the PBS documentaries, for example, we have in the databases, and have a little conversation on the side with them. And then in the classroom, they already, on the side, I already have an understanding with it. Please don't monopolize the classroom conversation because it's going to irritate everybody else. They're going to hate you. But then I also go after the ones that don't want to participate at all. And it's coercive because I put them in the syllabus. It's like I'm going to ask all of you individually. You cannot say I don't know. Actually, in many cases, teaching history, I have a PDF of a specific document that is on the screen. So, okay, so I'm asking about that document. I mean, you cannot say I don't know. I can rephrase the questions, I can make them more specific, but there's a document. You have to actually, hey, I'm going to be quiet for 3 minutes or 5 minutes. We're going to read the document. If you have to say something, you can just say, don't say, I don't know, or I don't want to. No, it's in the syllabus, you have to. You will have to do this. And I mean, there's some students that really, really don't like this, and I've had a few that drop out of class because of that, but the majority stay, and the majority at the end managed to pass. And some that, if I had left them to themselves, would have failed the class. I kind of forced them, they found this leave the city, kind of kicking and screaming. And, I mean, that's something else that learned from other professors is that as much as we try, we cannot say that every single student.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And that's,
I know, especially administrators don't like to hear this. But we can, as hard as we try, I mean, even it's a student working with them individually, we cannot say that every single student.
and yes, I'm sorry, I'll let you.
Well, I was going to say, related to that, but also the gamification. So I am not a gamer. I don't have any social media accounts or anything, but what it is competition. And some of those quiet students come alive when there's any kind, I mean, we're talking no technology competition. So I teach Spanish, and sometimes when we're doing like household vocabulary, I'll have different tables and I'll put one magazine picture at one table and the other. And there's 5 people here. You have 60 seconds to come up with as many vocabulary words as you can. One of you is the secretary. I set a timer, and then they have to switch tables. And so these students, sometimes it's a matter of, well, I do my homework, so why do I have to share everything I've done with everybody else, right? I'm already making a name kind of thing. But when they're on a team and they're having to compete with other students about it, sometimes they will step up, or I'll do Jeopardy at the board, right? The collaborative project together on teams. And I'll give the student at the board a time to try to work on the issue, and there's 3 teams playing against each other. And then when I call the all play, then they all go up. And then, of course, the person at the board can't relinquish the eraser or the pen, so they have to explain why the answer should be something else or tweak it or whatever. These kids get so, these are the finals. They're all just like, I'm an angel, and then all of a sudden they're like trash talking it. So again, these are things that in a competitive environment, I never would have expected that they will get engaged. Again, low stakes, it's just bragging rights. Nobody, is gonna get us, an automatic A or anything like that. But they also kind of pick out like, you like your stuff, unless it's next to you next time.
See, you just gave me a few ideas. So, I mean, that's why I do this. I don't do this really for you guys. I do it because I get feedback, because I'm preaching to the audience. So, is that on record? Okay, no, that was recorded. Okay, oh, I don't care anymore. I would do something really stupid to get fired. But the thing is that, again, that's paying attention to the students. Because we have one where, my students, instead, because I know they're using Wiki to look stuff up. So I'm teaching content by having students correct Wiki sites. We actually got permission and actually a project and some funding from Wiki EDU. And my students were first writing Wiki sites on underserved sciences that are underrepresented. Because they were wondering why, I said, post some pictures of scientists, what do they look like? And everybody can guess they're gonna be what? White males, for the most part, makes up a lot of Wiki scientists. And then the rest of us are left out. So my students, that engaged them so much to bring out these people that had very little information on them, which is the pain in the butt. It's hard to write a Wiki on that. And that project's okay, but oh my gosh, student writing is horrible. So we took a lot of editing, but now we're engaged in looking to see if someone who posted content on an environmental issue is accurate or not. And that's kind of cool because it comes a competition between the students. And like you was, I didn't know that was game. I didn't know that was a form of gaming, but whatever, but they're in competition to see if they can correct the most websites, or update the most websites during the class project period.
So I'm telling you, those signs behind you, the emergency, at least those in my upper levels, I'm like, okay, let's correct the grammar. But where's the accent missing? And so again, they get the groups together and we haven't actually turned it back into Lone Star to say, hey, want to reprint? Because they're mostly good, but yeah, they're always, we're all having like, if they go out to eat, they have to take a screenshot or not a screenshot, but a picture of their menu at a restaurant. Let's correct the spelling, let's correct the accents on this, things like that. And they upload it to D2L. So again, these are things all over, they're around for them, but then when you get them into collaborating on D2L, like post your picture, show your correction, somebody else can be like, oh, you missed another accent on here.
Oh, that's
so it just has them like observe their environment. These are, like you were saying, beyond the classroom. This is how you can apply this everywhere. Now, my students hate it when I correct their grammar, something like that in English. But the students love it. They like finding these. Oh, sorry, I found a greeting card and it didn't have the whatever. I'm like, bingo.
That is cool. I wouldn't know how to do that, but that's kind of cool. So guys, just to end this, I guess, because I got an hour and something drive. Did you get something out of today? Besides the picture with the toilet looked entertaining. I mean, but seriously, because what I'm trying to do is just get us thinking about it and also not make us feel guilty about it. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not engaging my whole class or I'm lecturing too much, because our students are screaming at us saying that lecture is comfortable for them, but they say they do their best concept learning from active learning activities, but they don't want to be inundated with it. Because I think our students, that's just not their mode of operating right now. Maybe when they're going to university, they'll get to that point, but we're nurturing them through the system. And that's what I got out of my students, for most of my students, at least at Kingwood, what we're seeing. And I mean, anybody at Kingwood could attest to that, that our students, they're not needy. It's just that they don't have the proper tools that they're coming with us. And I can't expect them to do all this high level stuff. I'm done. So can I